The march towards Starship Flight 12 is already on, and in the meantime, it's not stopping SpaceX from breaking all sorts of records and saying goodbye to a loved Falcon 9 booster in the fleet. Also, the race to the moon continues, so there's lots to dive into.
Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now.
Hey, Mark S. House with you here, and with the last version 2 ship out of the way with Flight 11 now a raging success, Pad 1 has no further missions to prepare for in its current state. Well, boy did we see SpaceX kick into some demolition action this week. Obviously, as we've talked about a few times now, the circular stool launch mount design is not compatible with the upcoming version 3 boosters. The new Super Heavy design has 2 separate quick disconnect interfaces, one for methane and one for oxygen. The Pad 1 design, of course, has just the single quick disconnect for both of those interfaces combined. Also, with the engines on Super Heavy being upgraded to Raptor 3, the total thrust coming out of the beast will be about 22% higher initially compared to the previous with Raptor 2s. At times, it felt like the initial Pad 1 was clinging on for dear life. The first flight showed us how they underestimated the damage that Super Heavy could inflict, but after some upgrades and plenty of refurbishment work between each mission, it made it through this critical early phase of flight testing. The plan is to demolish some of the existing ground infrastructure and convert what is needed now. A flame trench design will replace this, as we see nearby at Pad 2, as well as Launch Complex 39A in Florida. Remember, they can only do a lot of this work once they have a relatively clean slate to start with. Well, the demolition work seemed to begin with the liftoff of Flight 11. Check out this image thanks to RGV Aerial Photography's flyover afterward. They really must have gone hard with Flight 11 because a bunch of stuff here, including the booster quick disconnect, had clearly started melting away. That probably explains why they had such a dark exhaust bellowing out of the back of the launch site after liftoff. I was wondering why this seemed so dark last week, but scenes like this melted mount clearly provide some compelling evidence. Measuring the speeds and altitudes after 15 seconds with both Flight 10 and 11, they appear close enough to be identical to me, so I'm perplexed about why there seems to be a lot more damage this time. What do you think? It may feel like it's taken a long time to run through all of these Starship flights up to this point, but you've got to compare it to other large rockets. 11 flights in around 2.5 years with something this scale is really quite staggering, and the next year is going to be really something. Speaking of, our good friend Tony Bela has finally got the long-awaited 18-month Starship calendar for 2026 available, and I've just been able to get a hold of it. I've been a huge fan of his work for years, so I love these. The link is below there if you want one, and thanks for following and being subscribed. I absolutely appreciate you being right here, of course, but so many of you help inspire the creative people out there, and I'm super grateful I get to be a part of a community that really appreciates all of it. Anyway, with Booster 15 slightly contributing to the demolition work, it was time for the team to continue that. SpaceX had already sectioned off Pad 1 to most employees to quarantine the area for demolition. At the start of the week, we saw crew up at the tower arms beginning to remove the pushers at the ends. When a vehicle has been slightly raised off the ground by the arms, these parts would gently move the ship or booster backward or forward to make sure it is centered. That way, when they have the vehicles rotated over the orbital launch mount, the vehicle is perfectly aligned. By the start of the week, it looked like 3 of these had already been removed, leaving just the one left. Now again from above, look at the top of the arm truss here. SpaceX had installed these sets of eyelets, which seemed to indicate that they would use those to lift these parts out. The new design of arms seen at the other Starship pads has just the 2 of these big truss sections on each arm, so essentially half of what the Pad 1 arms have here. I had always assumed that they would likely remove the arms entirely and replace them with a new set already upgraded, but looking at this, perhaps they will simply cut off the 2 truss sections that they don't need and get to work upgrading these. If so, you would expect to see a crane lift this section up as they cut it off. If, however, the plan is to simply scrap the full set of arms piece by piece with the tower as a support, that is going to become apparent very soon. Thanks to the incredible Greg Scott in Florida, we could see from this flyover that they do have another set of arms being worked on at SpaceX's Roberts Road facility. Could these be replacement arms to be sent to Pad 1 instead of a future pad at the Cape? So many questions. The demolition work doesn't stop there, of course. We've also seen SpaceX starting to dig into the huge blast wall berm that protected the tank farm from Pad 1 launches. From the updated Starbase plan published in August, we can see that they do plan to change the shape of that blast wall a heap. The planned road that will wrap around the upgraded pad looks to be going right through the existing berm, so that obviously needs to be removed and relocated elsewhere. Well, they have been ripping into that wall without mercy, sometimes just dragging down entire wall segments. Along with that, the disassembly of the now redundant parts of the tank farm has also really kicked off, with them removing these manifolds that sit on top of the liquid oxygen sub-chillers. With that, a lot of the additional pipes that they installed to guide the gaseous nitrogen over the blast wall to stop that building up so fast inside the tank farm area. It continued quite rapidly through the week as first the liquid oxygen pump motors were removed, soon followed by the pumps themselves and even the sumps that contain all that super cold liquid oxygen. I think there's a good chance that we might see this same hardware pop up at a future Starship launch pad like Slick 37. We can probably expect to see the majority of this removed, as we think that they'll connect everything into the existing tank farm that is being configured for Pad 2. Well, going forward, both pads it seems. Now, speaking of Pad 2, every week that evolves quickly. All of the flexible hoses for the booster quick disconnect have been installed now, and in very quick fashion, they have started to perform retraction tests of those quick disconnects. This one for the liquid oxygen side is even more remarkable, as it seems that this might have been the actual speed that they might use for flights. It's awesome to see yet another piece of the puzzles come together, and around it all, the cladding on the bunker is getting quite close to being finished. This week, several pieces have been installed that cover up the water manifold. There are quite a few cutouts in those expected to be for valves. This location had a fresh cover on top, so it's looking super neat. Heading to the production site, big moves for the two vehicles being constructed for that first version 3 Starship flight. On the ship side, we saw Ship 39's forward dome section move into Megabay 2. Now, even though it has the majority of its tiles installed, it's missing some notable parts such as the valves inside the vents, or even the two raceways that we've come to expect from version 2 ships. We expect all this to appear really soon. The team hooked the straps up between the payload bay and forward dome, and they were soon lifted to be stacked together. The construction for Booster 18 is coming along very nicely too, as the very last 4-ring tall section of the booster made its way toward Megabay 1. As a reminder, this is the final section to be stacked along with the rest of the methane tank. With that being added, all they will need to do is stack the two monstrous sections together, and we'll have the first fully stacked version 3 booster rolling out. The area in the front of the two operational bays is rapidly changing this week with huge Gigabay work. The team had recently assembled the first tower crane, and the last critical parts for the second, such as the cab and parts of the jacking frame, have been arriving. One of the mobile cranes has been busy lifting up these columns of the bay just to the left there. So flying on over to Masseys, we can see this week work is continuing at a steady pace. After running conduit around the site and loading Masseys up with redundancy wherever they can, SpaceX have installed 2 new megapacks here beside the 4 that have been previously used. These 2 are larger in size compared to the old ones, so these combined should add plenty of capacity to supply all of the energy needs. Certainly needed after seeing the huge upgrades to everything that we've been tracking over the past few months. The whole area has been quite the cleanup. The bridge that they installed not long after the ship mishap was there so that they could access land across the water to recover the debris. This week it appears that the site was already clear and the bridge was disassembled. We can see a lot of the recovered hardware over here in the bins. At the commodities bunker, we had seen these steel sections staged close last week. These were for the roof, and we can see these clearly installed this week. Work has also started here on what looks to be more electrical conduit, and this could be related to the enclosed flare stack over here, which still needs to be routed into the new setup. It's also exciting to see this around the ship static fire stand. You'll notice that paint had been ground away from the top of the stand to create a flush surface all ready to weld to, and, well, over here we could see workers had already begun to lift steel pieces into place. There's also more staged nearby here. Now, once welded down, these will mount the new version 3 clamps using the bolt holes on top. Now, although I haven't talked about it a great deal, I've been quite intrigued about 3I Atlas. This week on Tuesday, the third ever interstellar object that we have ever found and researched was exactly on the opposite side of the Sun relative to Earth, as we can see here with NASA's Eyes on the Solar System website. There's a bunch of misinformation out there, and it can be pretty darn difficult to try to determine the real truth behind such things. In many cases, the story you are reading tends to get buried under layers of spin or bias, and that's why I've been using Ground News. It's a website and app designed to make reading the news easier and more data-driven. People keep asking me to comment on this story here about 3I Atlas. Some comments made recently by Avi Loeb seems to be fueling this story with claims that this is a 30 to 40% chance of being an interstellar comet of alien tech. You can follow along at ground.news/Marcus. Depending on where you read about it, you'll get a very different picture. Some outlets stuck nicely to the facts of what we know. Ars Technica there saying that you don't have to claim they're aliens to make these objects exciting. That's a good read actually, and on the flip side, with essentially no evidence, loads of claims suggesting the space object is not natural, and this is exactly where Ground News makes this easier. Each day they pull in thousands of articles from around the world and arrange them by story. In fact, the Nobel Peace Center even called it an excellent way to stay informed, avoid echo chambers, and expand your worldview. You can actually see what the coverage looks like. Each story comes with visual breakdowns of the political bias, ownership, and reliability. It's a way to cut through the noise and actually get the full picture. For example, with this article alone, there is around 90 sources split between left, centre, and right-leaning media outlets. Right now, you can get the same plan that I am using for just $5 a month when you visit ground.news/Marcus. The link is right there in the description, or you can scan the QR code right there on screen. That's nearly half off, by the way, so if you're tired of one-sided news and want a better way to stay informed, check it out. Big thanks to Ground News supporting the channel. Now, 3I Atlas is of course a genuinely intriguing story. For all those wishing for this to be some kind of alien mothership, there was the potential for it to kick off some unnatural maneuvers here. That is because if you are an alien race wanting to hide your activity, what better way to do it than when your ship is hiding behind the sun? After all, our Earth-based telescopes don't perform real well when blasted by all those photons. Of course, 3I Atlas is also near its closest to the massive object known as the Sun, and this would be about the most efficient time to reduce speed and fall into a lower solar orbit. You can thank the Oberth effect for that little bit of orbital mechanics trivia. The most optimal time for that is actually expected this coming Wednesday. Of course, it's never aliens, but one day perhaps we may be wrong about that. Personally, I would love it if we found real evidence of ETs out there. It would answer so many questions. Are we alone? Is it possible to travel the ridiculously vast space between star systems? I mean, can intelligent life survive their own intelligence long enough so that they don't destroy themselves? There are hundreds of inspirational questions that could come from this one discovery alone, but as the cliche goes, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. I tell you what though, I would love to be here if we ever get to find out. Much more likely, of course, this is a natural object that we don't have a lot of experience in observing. After all, this is only the third that we have found thanks to new equipment used. Given we have such limited study experience, we'll be learning a lot of new things which may seem strange. It sure would be pretty coincidental if the third thing that we've ever spotted out of possibly millions just happened to be the aliens that we seek. That doesn't mean that it isn't exciting to observe regardless. The initial studies of its chemical composition are intriguing. It has a relatively dark coma with cyanide vapours and other volatiles already detected. Initially, this seemed to be lacking in iron, but as it got closer to the Sun, that too has also now been observed. Although estimates vary a great deal, there's a chance that this could have originated in the Milky Way's thick disk. If so, that means it would have migrated further than any other comet-like object that we have ever seen. It would also be the oldest, being at least 7 billion years old. That would make it more than 2.5 billion years older than the solar system. This is still very speculative right now, but either way, finding out what this object is and where it came from will help add to our understanding of how solar systems and maybe even galaxies form. We had another record-breaking week for SpaceX with Falcon 9. On Sunday, almost a week ago, we kicked the events off with 2 back-to-back Starlink launches, one from each coast of the country. This doubleheader put 56 Starlink satellites in orbit, all while breaking records and setting new milestones. First was off from Cape Canaveral with booster 1067 lifting off with Starlink Group 1017 from Slick 40 early in the afternoon. Yes, if you know your booster numbers, you would know that 1067 is the current reuse leader, and here was this incredible beast on its record-breaking 31st flight. This has been leading the fleet for a while now. It was the first booster ever to successfully launch for the 24th time back in December of 2024, and from that point on, it has been in the lead. Booster 1062 had been the leader before that, but that was destroyed in a landing failure on its 23rd mission in August of 2024. Getting back to the record flight though, 31 orbital missions is just crazy, and as we already know, SpaceX is working on certifying Falcon 9 boosters up to 40 flights. On board, another set of 28 satellites to orbit, clearly shown at fairing separation, and the big question was, could this booster land successfully for the 31st time? Well, just a few minutes longer and we would find out. Waiting by was the drone ship, a shortfall of gravitas, and a nice daylight touchdown, proving yet again that Falcon 9 has not yet hit its limits. Just under 2 hours later, slightly earlier in the afternoon due to the time zone difference in California, we were here watching booster 1088 lifting off from Slick 4E at Vandenberg Space Force Base.
From 1010 to 10,000, go Starlink, go Falcon, go SpaceX.
Yes, you heard that right, from 1010 to 10,000. Back in 2018, SpaceX launched the first and second Starlink demo satellites named 1010A and B. Fast forward 7 years later and they've put 10,000 satellites into orbit. It's really quite incredible. Today, about 70% of all active satellites in space are Starlink. This booster was just a comparatively young one on its 11th flight, but it doesn't seem that long ago that passing the 10th flight was an amazing thing. Well, I still think it is, and keep in mind that no other company outside SpaceX has achieved reuse of an orbital class booster even after all these years. Another duplicate set of 28 satellites were on board, and it was of course I Still Love You out in the ocean awaiting the conclusion of yet another fiery touchdown. The signal was particularly clear for this one, so a nice time-lapse there right from the start of the landing burn. It's all still magic for so many of us. Now, right after this, there was a loss in signal from the second stage shown on the stream, and for a while, it had many people concerned that something may have happened prior to the deployment. Well, it seems like they probably just had a data dropout because there was nothing reported about any incident, and all of the satellites are reported in orbit at their expected positions, so nothing to worry about there. That still left us with 2 more for the week. Starlink Group 11-5 here at Vandenberg early Wednesday morning in an uncharacteristic liftoff not covered with fog. Quite a picturesque ascent actually, as another 28 satellites went up. Of course, I Still Love You was back out again after the catch on Sunday, so they really have this one constantly moving back and forth rapidly most weeks. This was landing number 21 for booster 1075. Now, to end the Falcon 9 adventures for the week, a bittersweet one on Thursday evening from Slick 40. This was a mission for the Spanish government and various partners with SpainSat NG II. It was flight 22 for the booster 1076 and also the last. Yes, in a now rare event, this one was being intentionally expended. These satellites are big and they need the full performance of Falcon 9 without the mass penalty that a booster recovery requires. Stage separation confirmed at a whopping 9,900 km per hour, booster 1076 fell into the darkness for the last time and plummeted minutes later unceremoniously into the ocean. Back to the second stage, on board was the second of 2 new generation satellites built by Airbus, essentially a communication satellite there to service all that important stuff, military operations, humanitarian relief, rescue missions and all that sort of thing. We did get to watch this one through the mission, so nothing too secretive. It needed to be pushed into a geostationary transfer orbit before release, so the second burn there had kicked off at the 27-minute mark to add over 2,500 meters per second of velocity. Just a few minutes later, there it was released and drifting away. As always, a packed week for Falcon 9. We had Stoke Space back this week sharing a water suppression test at Launch Complex 14. Here they were carrying out a full simulation with the diverter system below and, as we can see, a rainbird-style deluge above. This will essentially be the same process that we see during a launch, and it's very exciting watching what is going on here. Yes, they are developing a fully reusable launch vehicle, as we know, but we've just recently learned that they've raised another $510 million to pay for operational costs through to their initial launches of Nova. If you've been keeping track, that means that they've raised almost $1 billion in total. I'm really happy about this because it's another fully reusable design that is quite different to, say, Starship. It's much smaller, of course, but it's going to be able to lift about 3 metric tons to low Earth orbit with full reuse, up to 7 tons if expended. So yeah, it's kind of a nice middle ground between something like Electron and something much larger like Falcon 9. I think the market to be able to lift something of this size directly into a specific orbit may be quite a useful thing. Now, we have just had some updates on Orion integrity for the second Artemis mission. That has made its way to the vehicle assembly building and is now sitting on top of the SLS. Yes, Artemis II's space launch system is fully stacked and one step closer to getting astronauts back out there toward the moon next year. This will certainly be the biggest event in many years for NASA, as well as all partners involved. As the first new generation crewed mission heading around the moon, this is going to be a very special thing to witness. Not since Apollo 17 in 1972 have we seen humans back in the vicinity of the moon. Speaking of NASA, over the past few weeks, there has been reports that Jared Isaacman may still be reconsidered as the next NASA administrator. I've not wanted to dive into this until we had something that seemed a little more concrete because, as social media does, this sort of thing tends to get hyped up before there is really any news there. That said, everything has now become more dramatic. Behind the scenes, reports even indicate that Sean Duffy, NASA's current acting administrator, has been lobbying against Jared's nomination. Now, there's been concerning reports also saying that he is advocating for NASA to be folded into the Department of Transportation. This would essentially remove NASA's independence and allow Sean to retain influence over it without formally leading it. Needless to say, there is plenty of people upset in response to this idea. On top of all that strange news, Sean publicly announced for the first time that the 2027 timeline for the Artemis III mission is not feasible. He stated that the primary goal now is to land Americans on the moon during the current presidential term, emphasizing that they need to beat China to the surface. He says that with Starship not yet being fully ready and the human landing system still far from being operational, it was clear that a 2027 landing was not realistic. There is certainly no denying that SpaceX's Starship program, however impressive it is taking a lot longer than was hoped. Well, due to these delays, he is planning to open up SpaceX's human landing system contract to other companies. Think Blue Origin with the landers they are developing. A quick side note, New Glenn's first and second stages are now mated, and Dave Limp posted this neat time-lapse video from the factory showing them lifting the full vehicle onto the transporter erector. The other one there is that New Glenn simulator unit that we've seen on and off for years. They are now doing the final checks to get ready for the rollout and hot fire. Anyway, Blue Origin have that potential, it seems, to snap up the human landing system contract. Even other legacy companies like Lockheed Martin, who claim that they could land humans on the moon by 2028 without requiring any complex architecture like in-orbit refilling. Look, in my opinion, the goal is different here. China wants to land on the moon for the first time. SpaceX wants to create a system that allows the US to host a permanent lunar base, which is obviously a much more ambitious thing. What do you think? Is it more important to simply beat China to the surface or to properly design a much cheaper way to be stationed there permanently? So I will leave you with that. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to hit subscribe so we get to keep making them. Huge thanks to all of you incredible supporters listed there on the right. Thanks so much for helping us do what we do. If you missed this video, check it out by the way. There was loads of great comments on that one. Thanks for watching all this way through as always, my friends. I will see you all in the next video.